Have you ever woken up one morning, looked in the mirror, and asked yourself, what's the point of it all? Not that superficial question we ask when we're running late for work, but that deep, unsettling inquiry that emerges in moments of silence when all distractions fade away and we're alone with our thoughts. It's a strange sensation, almost physical, as if something fundamental were missing from the machinery of our existence. You feel it when you're stuck in traffic, looking out the car window, watching thousands of people rushing to places that perhaps even they don't know why they're important, or when you're scrolling through your infinite social media feed at 2 a.m, searching for something you can't define, but you know you're not finding. This sensation isn't new in human history, but it has never been so widespread, so systemic as it is today. And what worries me most isn't just that we're losing the meaning of life, but that we've created a world that makes it impossible for most people to find it again. For thousands of years, our ancestors lived in small communities where each person had a clear and defined role. The hunter knew why he hunted. The farmer understood the importance of each planted seed. The mother directly saw how her care shaped her children's future. There was a direct connection between action and purpose, between individual effort and collective well-being. The meaning of life wasn't an abstract philosophical question that required deep reflection. It was as natural as breathing. You woke up knowing exactly what your function was in the grand scheme of things, and that function was tangible, visible, necessary. Even when life was hard, even when hunger knocked at the door or disease devastated the community, there was clarity about what to do and why. Purpose was embedded in the very structure of existence. The great religions emerged precisely to systematize and expand this natural sense of purpose. They offered grand narratives that connected each individual life to a larger cosmos, each daily action to an eternal divine plan. Christianity promised that every suffering in this life had meaning from the perspective of eternity. Buddhism taught that each moment of consciousness was an opportunity for spiritual progress. Islam integrated every aspect of daily life into a system of devotion that gave meaning from how you ate to how you conducted your business. These weren't just abstract beliefs, they were sophisticated social technologies for generating meaning, operating systems for human consciousness that transformed raw existence into purposeful experience. But then came modernity, and with it, a radical transformation in how we organize our societies and consequently our lives. The Industrial Revolution didn't just change where we work or how we produce goods. It fundamentally altered the relationship between the individual and purpose. Suddenly, millions of people found themselves working in factories, performing highly specialized tasks whose final result they never saw. A worker who spent 10 hours a day tightening the same screw on the same machine had little emotional or intellectual connection to the final product he helped create. His contribution, however essential to the system's functioning, had become abstract, invisible, depersonalized. Work, which had once been the primary source of identity and purpose, transformed into something you do to earn money, to live your real life somewhere else. Urbanization accelerated this fragmentation. In modern cities, you can live next to someone for decades without ever knowing their name. Community which once provided natural context for individual existence, dissolves into an anonymous mass of strangers, you no longer see directly how your actions affect other people, no longer have the constant confirmation that your existence matters for the well-being of other concrete and specific human beings. Even when you are useful, even when your work benefits millions of people, that usefulness is mediated by systems so complex they become incomprehensible. The programmer who develops an algorithm that helps doctors diagnose diseases faster might spend years without ever meeting a single patient who benefited from his work. Modern science, with all its extraordinary contributions to knowledge and human welfare, has also inadvertently contributed to the crisis of meaning. By explaining the universe in purely materialistic terms, by reducing life to biochemical processes and consciousness to neural activity, it has emptied the cosmos of intrinsic purpose. The scientific universe is a place where things simply happen, where there's no inherent direction, where we humans are temporary cosmic accidents on an insignificant planet orbiting a common star in a common galaxy among billions of other galaxies. This is a liberating truth in many ways, as it frees us from limiting superstitions and gives us power to shape our own destiny. But it's also a truth that can be profoundly disorienting to minds that evolved to find patterns, purposes, and meanings in everything around them. Modern capitalism, in turn, has created a system where success is measured primarily in quantitative terms: salary, net worth, productivity metrics, numbers that rise and fall on digital screens. These numbers become substitutes for real meaning, but they're poor substitutes. You can have a robust bank account and still wake up in the morning not knowing why it's worth getting out of bed. You can be promoted, receive bonuses, see your social status increase, and still feel a deep emptiness that no amount of money seems able to fill. The economic system we've created is extremely efficient at producing goods and services, but it's terribly ineffective at producing meaning and purpose. Digital technology has amplified these tendencies in ways we're only beginning to understand. Social media has created the illusion of connection, while often increasing real isolation. You can have thousands of online followers and still feel profoundly alone. You can receive hundreds of likes on a post and still doubt whether your life matters to anyone. Digital communication, however convenient, rarely produces the kind of deep human connection that nourishes our sense of purpose. It connects us superficially to many people, but deeply disconnects us from specific individuals who could give genuine meaning to our experiences. The excess of choices in modern life, which should liberate us, often paralyzes us. When you can be anything, do anything, go anywhere, how do you decide what's worth doing? Our ancestors had fewer options, but also less anxiety about whether they were making the right choices. There were well-established paths to a meaningful life. You followed your parents' footsteps, married within your community, raised children, fulfilled your religious and social obligations. Today, you have to invent your own path, and that freedom, while precious, can be overwhelming. The abundance of possibilities can lead to choice paralysis and, ironically, to a life without clear direction. The speed of modern change also erodes meaning in several ways. The skills you develop might become obsolete in a few years. The institutions in which you invest your identity can disappear overnight. The truths that seemed fundamental can be questioned and discarded. In a world in constant flux, it's hard to build a solid foundation for life's meaning. How do you invest deeply in something when everything seems temporary? How do you develop expertise and mastery when what you're mastering might not exist in a decade? Globalization has created another type of existential displacement. You're constantly aware that there are billions of other people living completely different lives, facing problems that make your own problems seem insignificant in comparison. This global perspective can cultivate empathy and understanding, but it can also diminish the sense of importance of your own experience. Why should your concerns matter when there are people starving on the other side of the world? Why should your successes be celebrated when there are so many people who will never have the opportunities you've had? Global consciousness, while morally necessary, can be psychologically overwhelming. I need to pause for a moment and ask you directly, in what moments of your life do you most intensely feel this search for meaning that we're discussing? Those moments when distractions fall away and you wonder if you're living according to what really matters? I know many of us keep these questions to ourselves, perhaps out of fear of seeming too intense, too philosophical in a world that values the superficial and immediate. But here, in this space, your deep reflection is welcome. Share in the comments, I question the meaning of my life when. Your honesty might illuminate the path for someone going through the same existential crossroads, showing that we're not as alone as we think in our deepest questions. Artificial intelligence is beginning to add a new dimension to this crisis of meaning. Historically, humans could always console themselves with the idea that regardless of how much the world changed, there were certain fundamentally human capabilities that gave us unique value, intellectual work, creativity, empathy, complex decision-making, but now we're creating machines that can surpass humans in many of these areas. If an AI can write better than most writers, diagnose diseases more accurately than most doctors, and even compose music more captivating than most composers, what is the unique role of humans in the world we're creating? This isn't just an economic question about unemployment, though that's also a real concern. It's a fundamental existential question about what it means to be human when machines can do almost everything we used to consider specifically human. If human value has always been partially based on our utility, what happens when we become less useful than machines? How do we maintain a sense of purpose and dignity in a world where our productive contribution becomes progressively less necessary? The superficial answer many offer is that we'll simply find new ways to be useful, as we always have throughout history. And that might happen, but there's something qualitatively different about this transition. We're potentially creating intelligences that aren't just faster or stronger than us, but fundamentally more intelligent. And once you have systems that are more intelligent than humans, the very idea that humans are necessary to solve problems or make decisions begins to seem antiquated. This forces us to confront a question we might have avoided for too long. Is human value merely instrumental based on what we can do, or is there something intrinsically valuable about human experience, regardless of our utility? This isn't just an abstract philosophical question. It's rapidly becoming a practical issue that shapes public policies, corporate decisions, and the individual choices we make about how to live our lives. The erosion of meaning in modern life isn't just an individual problem, it's a systemic issue with profound social consequences. When people lose their sense of purpose, they become more vulnerable to extreme ideologies that promise to restore meaning through division and hatred. Populist nationalism, racial supremacist movements, fundamentalist religious cults, all these phenomena thrive in environments where people feel disconnected and purposeless. They offer simple narratives in a complex world, clear enemies in a nuanced reality, artificial purpose in an existence that feels empty. The crisis of meaning also contributes to mental health problems on a massive scale. Depression and anxiety aren't just chemical issues in the brain, they're often symptoms of a deeper disconnection between the life a person is living and the life they feel they should be living. When you can't find meaningful purpose in your daily existence, when you feel like you're just going through the motions without really living, it's natural for depressive symptoms to appear. Meaning isn't just a philosophical luxury, it's a basic psychological requirement for healthy human functioning. We see this also in rising rates of addiction, not just to substances, but to compulsive behaviors of all kinds: gambling, shopping, sex, even work. Addiction is often a desperate attempt to fill an existential void, to find something that makes you feel alive and engaged, even if temporarily. When real life doesn't offer sufficient stimulation or clear purpose, people seek artificial substitutes that at least offer the illusion of intensity and meaning. The social fragmentation that results from the loss of collective meaning also weakens our capacity to face global challenges that require coordination and shared sacrifice. Climate change, global inequality, the risks of biotechnology and artificial intelligence, all these problems require people to make personal short-term sacrifices for collective long-term benefits. But when people don't have a strong sense of shared purpose, when they don't feel connected to a larger community, why would they make those sacrifices? Why would you change your lifestyle to help people you'll never meet or future generations you'll never know? The paradox is that we've never had more tools to create meaningful lives than we have today. We have access to virtually all human knowledge in the palm of our hands. We can instantly connect with people who share our most specific interests, no matter where they are in the world. We have freedoms our ancestors couldn't even imagine: freedom of movement, expression, career choice, romantic partners, religious beliefs. We have material resources that make it possible to pursue purposes beyond mere survival. And yet, many people feel more lost and purposeless than ever. Part of the problem is that freedom and resources by themselves don't automatically generate meaning. In fact, they can make it harder to find meaning because they eliminate many of the external structures that traditionally guided people toward purposeful lives. It's as if we've given ourselves all the pieces of a puzzle, but without the box picture that shows how they should fit together. We have all the tools to build a meaningful life, but we've lost the instruction manual. Perhaps it's time to recognize that the meaning of life isn't something you find. It's something you build. Our ancestors didn't discover purpose in their lives. They created social, religious, and cultural systems that generated purpose automatically. They built meaning into the very structures of their societies. What if our task today isn't to return to those ancient systems, but to create new systems that generate meaning in ways appropriate for our era? This could involve redesigning how we organize work so that more people can see the direct connection between their efforts and meaningful results. It could involve creating new forms of community that offer the kind of deep connection that social media promises but rarely delivers. It could involve developing new cultural narratives that help people understand their place in the cosmos in ways that honor both scientific truth and human need for purpose. Consider the possibility that we're living through a historical transition moment comparable to the transition from tribal life to agricultural civilization, or from agricultural to industrial society. These were periods of great dislocation and suffering, but also of extraordinary creativity and growth. People who lived during these transitions often felt they were losing something essential, and they were right. They were losing old and familiar ways of living, but they were also gaining new and unforeseen possibilities. Perhaps the crisis of meaning we face today is similar. Perhaps we're in the middle of a transformation that will lead us to forms of purpose and significance we can't yet clearly imagine. But to get there, we first need to honestly acknowledge where we are. We need to admit that many traditional sources of meaning have been eroded or destroyed, and that this has real consequences for individual and social well-being. We also need to resist the temptation of simple or nostalgic solutions. We can't simply return to the small communities and religious belief systems of the past, not just because it would be impractical, but because we would lose something genuinely valuable in the process: scientific knowledge, individual freedoms, technological possibilities that dramatically expand human potential. The challenge isn't to go back to the past, but to integrate what we've learned about purpose and human meaning with the realities of the modern world. This might require us to fundamentally rethink some of our basic assumptions about how society should function. Perhaps we need new types of institutions that serve the function traditional religions used to serve, providing structures for the search for meaning, communities for mutual support, and narratives that connect individual lives to larger purposes. Perhaps we need to redesign our cities, our workplaces, our schools in ways that facilitate deep human connections and meaningful work. Perhaps we need new forms of education that prepare people not just for specific careers, but for a lifetime of continuous purpose seeking in a constantly changing world. This could include teaching self-knowledge, skills, techniques for finding significance in diverse circumstances, methods for building and maintaining communities, and ways to contribute to others' well-being, even when your formal work doesn't offer that opportunity directly. Technology, which has contributed to the problem, can also be part of the solution. We could use digital tools to create deeper connections instead of more superficial ones. We could design systems that help people find work that aligns with their unique values and talents. We could use artificial intelligence not to replace human contribution, but to augment and direct it in ways that maximize both efficiency and meaning. The fundamental question is whether we'll manage to make this transition consciously and intentionally, or whether it will be imposed on us by circumstances. If we don't actively address the crisis of meaning, it will likely resolve itself in ways nobody wants, through authoritarianism that offers artificial purpose through oppression, through conflicts that create meaning through destruction, or through complete social fragmentation where different groups live in totally separate and incompatible realities. But if we can face the challenge head on, if we can consciously build new sources of meaning adequate to the modern world, we might be on the verge of an era of unprecedented human flourishing. Imagine a world where technology liberates people from tedious and unnecessary work, allowing them to concentrate on activities they find genuinely meaningful. Imagine communities where people know each other deeply and mutually support each other in pursuing their unique purposes. Imagine educational systems that help each person discover and develop their particular talents in ways that contribute to the common good. This isn't utopianism, it's a real possibility, but only if we recognize the seriousness of the problem we face and commit to solving it with the same creativity and determination we apply to technological and economic challenges. The meaning of life isn't a luxury, it's a basic human need, and societies that fail to provide it to their members eventually pay a high price in terms of mental health, social cohesion, and political stability. The irony is that in many ways, it's never been easier to live a meaningful life if you know how to do it. You have access to learning, growth, contribution, and connection opportunities that were unimaginable for most people throughout history. But you also live in an environment that doesn't automatically guide you toward these opportunities, that often distracts you from them, and that might even make them invisible. Perhaps the first step is simply recognizing that the search for meaning is a legitimate and necessary part of human life, not a luxury you can pursue only after all your other needs are satisfied. It's as fundamental as food, shelter, security, and social connection. And like these other needs, it requires intentional attention and consistent effort to be satisfied. This might mean making different choices about how you spend your time, prioritizing activities that offer genuine significance over those that offer only temporary pleasure or status. It might mean actively seeking communities where you can contribute in ways that matter to you. It might mean choosing work based not just on salary or prestige, but on alignment with your values and opportunities to make a positive difference. It might mean developing contemplative practices that help you maintain perspective on what really matters amid the pressures and distractions of daily life. It might mean investing in deep relationships with some people instead of superficial connections with many people. It might mean finding ways to use your unique talents in service of something larger than yourself. None of these things are easy in our current cultural environment, which often works against them, but they are possible and they are necessary. And when you begin to build a genuinely meaningful life, you not only improve your own well-being, you also become part of the solution to a problem that affects all of society. When we observe the history of great human transformations, we realize there have always been periods of meaning crisis that preceded significant evolutionary leaps. The transition from nomadism to agriculture generated profound existential anxieties among people who suddenly found themselves tied to a piece of land, dependent on forces they couldn't completely control. The urban revolution created forms of alienation that the inhabitants of the first cities barely knew how to name. The scientific revolution dissolved cosmologies that had provided certainty and purpose for millennia, leaving many people feeling lost in a suddenly vast and directionless universe. Each of these transitions eventually led to new forms of social organization and new systems of meaning that were in many ways superior to the previous ones. They offered more security, more possibilities, more knowledge, more freedom, but the transition period was always difficult, always marked by a feeling that something fundamental was being lost. And there was an element of truth to that feeling, something was being lost. But something even greater was being gained. What makes our current situation unique is the speed and scope of transformation. We're going through multiple revolutions simultaneously: digital revolution, biotechnological revolution, artificial intelligence revolution, climate revolution, demographic revolution. Each of these changes by itself would be sufficient to profoundly challenge traditional structures of meaning. Together, they create a perfect storm of existential dislocation that might be unprecedented in human history. But it's precisely because our situation is so extreme that the possibilities for positive transformation might also be extraordinary. When old systems become completely inadequate, there is space to create something genuinely new. And we've never had so many intellectual, technological, and organizational tools to consciously design new forms of human life. Consider what would be possible if we applied to the question of human meaning the same level of creativity, resources, and international collaboration we apply to developing technologies or solving economic problems. Imagine research institutes dedicated to understanding how different social arrangements affect existential well-being. Imagine large-scale experiments with new forms of community organization. Imagine educational systems designed not just to transmit information, but to help each person discover their unique purpose and develop the skills needed to pursue it. This isn't science fiction. We already have examples of communities, organizations, and even countries experimenting with innovative approaches to human well-being that go beyond mere economic success. Some companies are redesigning work structures to maximize not just productivity, but meaning and satisfaction. Some cities are experimenting with new types of public spaces that facilitate genuine human connections. Some educational systems are integrating contemplation, self-knowledge, and purpose into their core curricula. The growing positive psychology movement is developing a solid scientific foundation for understanding what genuinely constitutes a thriving life. Research on happiness and well-being is revealing universal principles about what makes human life satisfying, principles that can inform decisions about how to structure societies, communities, and individual lives. We're learning about the fundamental importance of deep relationships, meaningful work, personal growth, contribution to something greater than ourselves, and time for contemplation and rest. Simultaneously, new technologies are creating unprecedented possibilities for connecting people with purposes and communities aligned with their unique values and talents, digital platforms could, in theory, help each person find not just work that pays the bills, but work that makes use of their specific strengths in ways that contribute to causes they consider important. Social networks could, if properly designed, facilitate communities based on deep shared interests instead of superficial connections and empty entertainment. Virtual and augmented reality are beginning to offer new forms of experience and expression that can dramatically expand possibilities for creativity, exploration, and personal growth. Biotechnology might eventually give us tools to optimize not just our physical health, but our capacity to experience joy, connection, and purpose. Artificial intelligence, properly directed, could become a powerful tool for personalizing education, career, and life experiences in ways that maximize individual flourishing within systems that promote collective well-being. But realizing these possibilities isn't automatic. It requires conscious choices about what kind of future we want to create. And these choices must be made not just by technological or political elites, but by ordinary people who understand that the question of meaning isn't a luxury, but a fundamental human necessity that must be taken as seriously as questions of economic or national security. Democracy, as currently practiced in most countries, is poorly equipped to deal with questions of meaning and purpose because it focuses primarily on measurable material interests. Politicians promise better economy, better health, better security, but rarely address deeper questions about what kind of life is worth living or how to create societies that promote genuine human flourishing. This isn't necessarily a failure of politicians, it's a limitation of political systems that evolved to solve different types of problems. We might need new forms of governance specifically designed to address questions of existential well-being. This could include citizen councils dedicated to quality of life issues, participatory budgets that allow communities to invest in initiatives that promote connection and purpose, and metrics of social success that go beyond GDP to include measures of life satisfaction, community cohesion, and personal fulfillment. Some of the most important solutions might come not from governments or corporations, but from grassroots movements that emerge when ordinary people organize around shared values. We already see this in movements like co-housing, where groups of people choose to live in intentional communities that balance individual privacy with shared resources and connections. We see it in transition, initiatives that help communities become more resilient and sustainable in ways that also promote social cohesion. We see it in solidarity economy networks that prioritize human and environmental well-being over profit maximization. What these movements have in common is recognition that individual and collective well-being are deeply interconnected, and that creating a meaningful life requires not just personal growth, but also transformation of the social systems we're embedded in. They understand that you can't solve the crisis of meaning simply by telling people to find purpose in their private lives. You also have to create social contexts that make this possible and natural. Education will be fundamental to any successful transformation. Our current educational systems were designed for the industrial era, focusing primarily on transmitting information and technical skills needed for specific jobs. But in an era where information is widely available and where many technical skills can be automated, education needs to focus more on developing capacities that are fundamentally human: self-awareness, empathy, creativity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence, and the ability to find meaning and purpose in rapidly changing circumstances. This could involve teaching contemplative practices from early on, helping children develop the capacity to observe their own thoughts and emotions, to be present in the moment, and to reflect on what's most important to them. It could include education about different wisdom traditions and meaning systems, not to indoctrinate, but to expose young people to the rich diversity of ways humans have found purpose throughout history. It could involve practical projects that connect academic learning with real contributions to community well-being. More fundamentally, future education needs to help people develop what we might call existential literacy, the ability to navigate questions of meaning and purpose with skill and wisdom. This isn't something you can learn once and be done. It's a capacity that needs to be cultivated and refined throughout life, especially in a world where external circumstances are constantly changing. Technology can be a powerful tool in this educational process, but only if used appropriately. Artificial intelligence applications could personalize learning experiences to match each individual's unique interests, talents, and styles. Virtual reality could enable immersive experiences that develop empathy and understanding of different perspectives. Digital platforms could connect learners with mentors, projects, and communities that align with their personal aspirations, but technology alone will never be sufficient. The development of purpose and meaning requires real human relationships, experiences in the physical world, and time for reflection that can't be accelerated or optimized. Some of the most important lessons about how to live a meaningful life can only be learned through direct experience, trial and error, and deep conversations with other people facing similar challenges. Spirituality will also have an important role, though perhaps not in the form we traditionally recognize. Organized religions are losing influence in many parts of the world, but the human need for connection to something greater than ourselves remains constant. We're seeing the emergence of new forms of spiritual practice that combine insights from ancient traditions with modern scientific understanding forms that offer the benefits of spirituality without requiring belief in specific doctrines. This might include secular practices of meditation and mindfulness, community rituals that mark important life transitions, philosophical traditions that help people find meaning without recourse to the supernatural, and ways of connecting with nature and the cosmos that cultivate a sense of reverence and belonging. What these practices have in common is recognition that humans need experiences of transcendence, moments where they feel connected to something larger than their everyday concerns. The climate crisis, threatening as it is, might ironically provide a source of shared purpose that has been difficult to find in the modern era. Addressing climate change requires exactly the kind of international cooperation, long-term sacrifice, and sense of responsibility toward future generations that can give people a clear sense that their lives matter. Working to preserve a habitable planet for their descendants is a purpose few would question, and one that connects local action with global meaning. But only if we approach the climate crisis in a way that recognizes its existential dimension, not just its technical dimension, it's not sufficient to develop clean technologies. Though that's necessary, we also need to create cultural narratives that help people understand how living sustainably can be not just a moral obligation, but a source of meaning and personal satisfaction. We need to show that a sustainable world isn't necessarily a world of deprivation, but potentially a world of deeper connections, stronger communities, and more authentic forms of prosperity. If these reflections have touched something you've been feeling, but perhaps haven't found words to express, know that you're not alone. By subscribing to this channel, you'll connect with a growing community of people who share your concerns and your desire for deeper understanding of our time's existential challenges. Each week, we gather here to explore together the great questions that define our era and to seek not just understanding, but also wiser ways to live amid the transformations we're witnessing. This isn't just a channel, but a space for dialogue and collective growth, where we can face together the complexity of creating meaning in a world that often seems to have lost it. The loss of meaning in modern life isn't an individual problem each person must solve alone. It's a collective challenge that requires collective solutions. But these solutions begin with individuals who recognize the problem, who refuse to accept empty existence as normal, and who are willing to do the difficult work of building meaning in their own lives, while working to create social structures that make this easier for others. The price of not addressing this crisis will be paid not just by individuals living purposeless lives, but by entire societies that lose the capacity to cooperate, to dream of better futures, and to make the sacrifices necessary to face the global challenges that define our epoch. But the potential of successfully addressing it is the possibility of creating forms of human life richer, more connected, and more satisfying than anything our species has ever experienced. The choice is ours, and though time is limited, we still have the opportunity to consciously choose what kind of future we want to build. The question is whether we'll have the wisdom and courage to make that choice before it's made for us by circumstances.